Samarkand, 328 BC. The most powerful man alive is on his feet at a dinner party, blind drunk, screaming for his guards. Across the room stands Cleitus the Black, the officer who once saved his life on a battlefield, the brother of the woman who nursed him as an infant. In about 60 seconds, Alexander will tear a spear from a guard's hands and drive it through his chest. And here's the part nobody tells you. Within days, his own court will rule that no wrong was done, because, as his philosopher will explain to the weeping king, whatever a king does is just. This is the dark side of Alexander the Great, not a hit piece. Every incident in this video comes straight from the ancient sources, the same Greek and Roman writers every biography of the man is built on. And buried in those same pages is a question that should haunt all of ancient history. This man was worshipped as a living god, real temples, real priests, real sacrifices. So who decided that? Who looked at the man holding the spear and made him divine? Hold that question, because nobody ever hid the answer. It's been sitting in the open for 2,000 years. People just decided not to look. But to understand the man in that room, you have to go back 13 years to a Greek city that made one mistake. Alexander is 21. His father Philip, the man who actually built the Macedonian war machine, has just been assassinated, and every Greek city is quietly betting the boy can't hold it together. Then a rumor spreads. Alexander has died on campaign in the north, and Thebes, one of the oldest names in Greek history, the city of Oedipus, the birthplace of Heracles, takes the bet. It rises and traps the Macedonian garrison inside its walls. 2 weeks later, Alexander is standing outside those walls with 30,000 men. Very much alive, he offers terms. Thebes answers with one defiant proclamation too many. What happens next stunned even his own allies. The city is stormed. Diodorus records 6,000 Thebans cut down in the streets. Most of them after the resistance had already collapsed. People dragged from altars. Priests, the elderly. When it's over, Alexander sells the survivors, 30,000 human beings, most of them women and children, into slavery. Then he levels the city to its foundations. 1,000 years of Greek history erased in an afternoon. He spares the temples and one private house, the home of a poet whose verses he happened to like. And the cold genius of it, he put the sentence to a vote of Greek allies nursing old grudges. So on paper, Greece destroyed Thebes. Alexander merely held the sword. His defenders call it deterrence. And it worked. The Greek world went silent for a generation. But watch what this moment teaches a 21-year-old. Because Thebes handed Alexander the most dangerous lesson of his life, total annihilation gets results. The next city that told him no wouldn't just be erased, it would be turned into a display. 3 years later, Alexander is carving through the Persian Empire, and he reaches Tyre, an island fortress half a mile off the coast, walls 150 feet high, never taken in its history. And here's what the lectures skip. Tyre didn't rebel. The Tyrians offered him neutrality. All they refused was to let him inside their most sacred temple to sacrifice to Heracles. The hero Alexander claimed as his ancestor. He wasn't asking to pray, he was asking them to endorse the bloodline. That refusal cost 7 months. Alexander demolished the old mainland city and used its rubble to build a causeway through open sea. You can still see it today. Every Alexander the Great documentary lingers on that causeway, and fair enough, it's a genuine marvel of military history. What gets less airtime is what happened when the walls finally broke. Roughly 8,000 Tyrians die in the sack. And then, with the fighting over, with the city already his, Alexander takes 2,000 surviving men, the ones who fought to defend their home, and has them crucified along the beach. Miles of crosses, facing the sea, arranged as a message to the next city on his route. 30,000 more people are sold into slavery. The sources don't flinch here. Curtius and Diodorus both record the crosses. The next city, Gaza, saw the message and resisted anyway. When it fell, its governor, Batis, was still breathing. One Roman-era source, Curtius, says Alexander had the man's ankles pierced, threaded with leather straps, and dragged him alive behind a chariot around the city walls, recreating his hero Achilles dragging Hector. Historians dispute that scene, so treat it as contested. What no source disputes, Gaza's men were wiped out to the last, and its women and children sold. He was 24 years old. He had never lost. And somewhere between the beach at Tyre and the sand at Gaza, the story he told about himself began to change, because his next stop was Egypt, where a priest in a desert oracle said the words that broke history. Egypt didn't fight him. Egypt handed him the crown of the pharaohs, and to Egyptians, every pharaoh was, by definition, a living god. But Alexander wanted more than a local title. He marched 300 miles into the western desert to the oracle of Ammon at Siwa, a god the Greeks equated with Zeus himself. What was said inside the shrine stayed private. What came out was a rumor Alexander never once denied. The priest had greeted him as the son of the god, son of Zeus. And traveling with the army was a court historian named Callisthenes, whose entire job was writing the campaign for posterity, and who now wrote that the sea itself had bowed before Alexander. Remember that name. Callisthenes helped build the god, and what the god eventually did to him is one of the ugliest turns in this story. Now, 331 BC, Gaugamela, Alexander, badly outnumbered, dismantles the Persian royal army in a single afternoon. No serious historian disputes his talent, and neither will I. He may be the most gifted commander ancient Greece ever produced. This isn't a story about the talent. It's about what the talent was for. Because in 330 he reached Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the Persian world, and Persepolis surrendered. No siege, no resistance. He handed it to his army anyway. Diodorus says Alexander declared it the most hateful city in Asia and turned his soldiers loose on the population for a full day. I'll let you imagine what an unpaid army does with a rich city and permission. Months later, the palace itself burned. 3 ancient sources describe a drunken party, an Athenian courtesan named Tyre proposing they torch it, and Alexander, wreath on his head, leading the way with the first flame. A 4th source, Arrian, insists it was cold policy, payback for Persia burning Athens 150 years earlier. So take your pick, a party trick, or a doctrine of terror. Those are the only 2 options the record allows. Either way, archaeologists found the ash layer. The burning of Persepolis was real, and one of the wonders of the ancient world went into the sky in a single night. And after Persepolis, the campaign changes. Alexander begins running out of enemies to punish. So he starts punishing his own. A minor plot against Alexander's life surfaces in camp, and the investigation lands on Philotas, commander of the elite companion cavalry. Not because he joined the plot, because he'd been told about it and didn't think it was worth reporting. For that, Philotas is tortured through the night. Curtius describes it in detail, I'll spare you, until he confesses to everything and anything. In the morning, the army executes him, but Philotas was never the real problem. His father was. Parmenion, 70 years old, Philip's finest general, the man whose victories made the Macedonian Empire possible in the first place, currently sitting on Alexander's entire treasury and supply line with an army that loves him. He is accused of nothing. There is no evidence, no trial, not even the pretense of one. So Alexander sends riders on racing camels across the desert to outrun the news. They reach the old man, hand him a letter, and while he's reading it, they cut him down. 40 years of loyalty ended in the time it takes to read a paragraph. The army absorbed the lesson. Guilt was now optional. But if you're thinking Alexander only did this kind of thing cold, at a distance, through letters and other men's blades, remember where this video started. It's time to go back to that dinner party. First, understand what Cleitus the Black meant to Alexander. At the Battle of the Granicus, a Persian noble's blade was falling toward the back of the young king's skull, and Cleitus severed the man's arm mid-swing. He is the reason this story exists at all. His sister, Lenice, was Alexander's childhood nurse. The family had already given sons to his wars. Samarkand, 328 BC. A banquet, and the wine at the Macedonian court was never gentle. The flatterers are in full voice, comparing Alexander to the gods, to Heracles, and mocking his dead father Philip as a footnote to the sun. And Cleitus, old guard to the bone, has had enough. He quotes Euripides at the king, lines about how soldiers bleed while the commander collects the glory. He tells Alexander that everything he has was bought with Macedonian blood, his father's men. And then he raises his right hand across the table and says the unforgivable thing, "This hand saved your life." Alexander hurls an apple at his head and gropes for his dagger. A bodyguard has already hidden it. He screams for the trumpeter to sound the general alarm, and the trumpeter refuses. A nameless soldier staring down a raging king. It probably prevents a massacre. Friends wrestle Cleitus out of the hall, and Cleitus, being Cleitus, comes back in through another door with one more insult on his lips. Alexander rips a pike from a guard's hands and runs him through. Then the fog lifts. Some sources say Alexander pulled the weapon out of his friend's body and braced it against the wall to fall on it himself, and the guards stopped him. He spent 3 days in his tent, refusing food, crying out for Lenice, the woman who raised him, whose brother he had just destroyed with his own hands. And this is where it should have ended, a broken man finally confronting what he was. Instead, the court philosopher Anaxarchus walked into the tent and asked why the master of the world was crying like a slave over law and opinion. Zeus, he said, keeps justice seated beside his throne, and so whatever a king does is just. Whatever a king does is just. Honestly, that is Alexander the Great, explained in a single sentence. Plutarch tells us the king found it comforting. He got up. He stopped weeping. And his next project wasn't a city or a border. It was your knees. In the Persian court, there was a ritual called Proskynesis, bowing, even fully prostrating, before the king. To Persians, it was etiquette. To Greeks, you did that before a god, never a man. In 327, Alexander staged a dinner to introduce it to his Greeks and Macedonians. One by one, guests drank, bowed to the floor, and received a kiss from the king. Then came Callisthenes, the historian, remember, the very man who wrote the son of Zeus legend into the record. He drank, he skipped the bow, and he walked up for his kiss anyway. Alexander refused it, and Callisthenes shrugged in front of everyone, "Then I leave the poorer by a kiss." The room laughed. Alexander did not. The prostration plan was quietly shelved for the Macedonians, and Callisthenes was a marked man. Months later came the excuse, a plot among the royal pages, teenage nobles, one of them flogged over an insult on a hunt. The boys were tortured. Did they implicate Callisthenes? The eyewitness sources flatly contradict each other, so I'll flag it honestly and move on. What no one disputes is this: Callisthenes was arrested and never seen free again. One tradition says he was tortured and hanged. Another says he was hauled along with the army for months, in chains, until disease finished the job. The man who wrote Alexander into a god died as a demonstration of what happens to anyone who refuses to worship one. And with the last honest voice in camp gone, Alexander turned toward India, where the numbers stop sounding like war and start sounding like something nobody had a word for yet: the mountain city of Massacres. After days of brutal fighting, the town's defense rests on 7,000 professional soldiers hired from the Indian interior, and Alexander offers them terms: their lives for their surrender. They accept. They march out under the agreement and camp on a nearby hill with their families. That night, Alexander surrounds the hill and wipes them out. All of them. Diodorus describes the mercenaries' wives picking up their fallen husbands' weapons and fighting to the end. Even Plutarch, a writer who openly admired Alexander, calls this a stain on his record. The king broke his sworn word. The friendliest version, Arians, claims the mercenaries were planning to slip away in the night. So even the best defense on offer amounts to, he suspected they might break the deal, so he broke it first, on several thousand people. And their children. A year later, at the river Hephaestion, in weeks of monsoon rain, his army refused to march one step further east. The only defeat of Alexander's career was inflicted by his own exhausted men. He sulked in his tent for 3 days, the same 3 days he gave Cleitus, and then turned for home. But the way home ran through the lands of the Mali, and when they declined to submit, he stormed town after town. At one wall he climbed first, the ladder snapped behind him, and he stood alone inside the city until an arrow punched through his chest into a lung. His army, believing him dead, broke in with a rage the sources record plainly. No one was spared, not the women, not the children, and that was one town of many. The Mali had invaded no one. Their crime was living between a wounded king and the sea. Alexander survived the arrow, and then he chose a route home that achieved something no enemy had managed in 12 years of war. There were comfortable roads back to Persia. Alexander chose the Gedrosian desert, 60 days of dunes, heat, and thirst along the coast of what is now southern Pakistan and Iran. The official reason was supplying his fleet offshore. Arrian, his most sympathetic biographer, quietly gives the real one. Legend said Cyrus and the queen Semiramis had both tried to cross this desert and failed. Alexander wanted to succeed where they hadn't. The army ate its baggage animals. Wagons were abandoned. The sick and the stragglers were left where they fell. One night, a flash flood tore through the camp in the dark and swept away most of the women and children following the army. Ancient claims put the losses as high as 3/4 of everyone who marched in. Modern historians think it was less, but even the cautious estimates agree. Thousands of his own people died in that sand, more than any enemy ever cost him, for a bragging right over a dead king and a mythical queen. No army ever did to Alexander's men what Alexander did to them in Gedrosia. He emerged from the desert and answered the disaster, most sources say. With a week-long drunken procession styled after the god Dionysus, followed by a wave of executions sweeping through his own governors. And then, in the autumn of 324, the person Alexander loved most in the world died. What he did next is the part of every Alexander the Great biography that even his admirers describe through their fingers. Hephaestion, Alexander's closest companion since boyhood, in every sense the ancient sources imply, and sometimes state. He dies of a fever at Ecbatana, 32 years old. Alexander lay on the body for a day and a night. He cut his own hair. He had the manes and tails of every horse in the army shorn. He banned music across the camp. And he wrote to the oracle at Siwa asking that his dead friend be worshipped as a god. The oracle compromised on divine hero. Then the grief found targets. The physician who failed to save Hephaestion was executed, crucified, in Plutarch's account. And that winter, Alexander marched into the mountains of the Casaeans, a tribe whose only offense was existing nearby, and these are Plutarch's words, offered the slaughter of the entire nation as a sacrifice to Hephaestion's spirit. Sit with that for a second. In Alexander's beloved Iliad, Achilles cuts down 12 captives on Patroclus's funeral pyre, and Homer himself calls it an evil deed. Alexander, who slept with that book under his pillow, read that passage and scaled it up to a people. And it's here, at the very end, that we can finally answer the question from the beginning of this video. Who made this man a god? Because in that same year, the Greek cities received word of the king's wishes. Historians still argue whether Alexander formally demanded divine honors or merely made the request impossible to misread. It didn't matter. The cities had seen Thebes. In Sparta, a politician named Demas answered with the driest sentence in Greek history: "If Alexander wishes to be a god, let him be a god." In Athens, a speaker proposed adding him to the pantheon as the 13th Olympian. He was prosecuted for it later, once Alexander was safely dead. People still ask whether Alexander the Great was evil, and historians flinch. You can't judge the ancient world by modern standards. Fine, judge him by ancient ones. Homer called slaughtering captives for the dead an evil deed. Plutarch called Massaga a stain. His own army refused to follow him. His own trumpeter refused the alarm. The ancient world judged him just fine, quietly, and then it built the temples anyway. So take the full inventory. The priests of Egypt made him a god because their theology required a divine pharaoh. The oracle at Siwa made him a son of Zeus because he marched 300 miles through a desert to collect the title. His court made him a god one flattery at a time because everyone had seen what happened at a dinner in Samarkand. And the Greek cities made him a god because the crosses at Tyre were still in living memory. Every road leads to the same answer. Who made Alexander a god? Alexander did. At spear point. At scale. For years. In June of 323 BC, in Babylon, he burned with fever for 10 days and died at 32. Poison rumors flew immediately. Most historians say disease. When they asked the dying king who should inherit the empire, Diodorus records his answer: the strongest. 4 decades of war between his own generals followed. His mother, his wives, his children, all destroyed in the scramble. More people may have died fighting over his legacy than in building it. And the great? Here's the detail I can't get out of my head. That title appears nowhere in his lifetime. Its earliest surviving use is in a Roman comedy written for laughs more than a century after his death. And it stuck because Roman generals wanted to be him. The title was never a verdict. It's a fan letter from his imitators. The evidence was never hidden. The 6,000 at Thebes, the beach at Tyre, the ash at Persepolis, the letter in Parmenion's hands, Cleitus, Callisthenes, Massaga, the Mali, the desert, the Casaeans. It all sits in the same ancient pages that praise him, side by side, paragraph by paragraph. Every generation read both, and every generation chose the god, because if he was a god, then the crosses on the beach were destiny, and nobody has to answer for destiny. He didn't become a god after he died. He spent his entire life demanding it, and for 23 centuries we have been obeying. They made Alexander a god, because the only other option was to look at everything you just heard and call the real man what he was.